Before the new year truly begins, I would like to invite you to pause for a moment. There is no need to think too much, only to be honest with yourself. If right now you still have not placed yourself first, then how much longer do you think you will continue carrying the expectations of others while your own inner life is quietly being neglected? Many of us live this way. On the outside, we fulfill our roles, we respond, we keep trying. But on the inside, there is exhaustion, depletion, and a silent waiting to be heard. Not because life is too harsh, but because we have grown used to placing ourselves at the very end. We give so much, yet rarely ask how much of ourselves is left. The year 2026 does not need to become a year where you strain harder or prove more. Perhaps the greatest discipline of this new year is not found in what you try to give to the world, but in what you are mindful enough to keep for yourself. To keep the steadiness of your mind, to keep your life energy, to keep your right to rest, to be listened to return to yourself. In the teachings of the Buddha, there is a truth that is very simple yet often forgotten. You yourself are your own refuge. No one can live through your pain for you, and no one can practice in your place. Putting yourself first is not indulgence of the ego, nor is it turning away from others. It is an act of awakening, a decision to no longer abandon the suffering that is present within you. When you know how to return to yourself and care for your own mind first, then what you give afterward is no longer sacrifice. The year 2026 can be the beginning of that return. Not loud, not pressured, just a very clear choice. In this video, we will walk together through the teachings of the Buddha, not to make you appear greater in the eyes of the world, but to help you stop hurting yourself any further. The path of healing begins here, in the moment you choose to place yourself first with understanding and compassion. Lesson 1. Putting yourself first is not selfish, but mindfulness. Many of us grow up with a quiet belief that putting ourselves first is wrong. We fear becoming selfish. We fear being judged. We fear disappointing others. And so we become familiar with yielding, enduring, staying silent, and telling ourselves that this is good, that this is right, that this is what it means to be mature. Yet we rarely pause to look more deeply and ask what is truly happening within our own mind. In Buddhism, there is a truth that is very clear, yet often misunderstood. When you are not aware of your own pain, you will unknowingly carry that pain into the lives of others. A person who does not realize they are hurting will easily speak words that hurt. A person who does not recognize their own exhaustion will easily pour their irritation onto the people they love most. A person who does not return to care for their own mind will try to fill the inner emptiness with control, expectations, and demands placed on the outside world. The Buddha taught that no one can purify another. This teaching is not cold or separating. It gently reminds us that each person must walk their own path of awakening. You cannot carry a mind full of anxiety and expect to create peace for others. You cannot abandon yourself and hope to build healthy relationships. And you cannot continue to ignore the suffering within while wishing for a lighter life on the outside. Putting yourself first does not mean making yourself the center of everything. It is not indulgence, nor is it acting out of ego. In the spirit of Buddhism, putting yourself first is an act of mindfulness. It is the moment you are aware enough to recognize that you are tired, brave enough to admit that you are sad, honest enough to see that you have gone beyond your limits, and compassionate enough to stop forcing yourself to endure simply to maintain a good image in the eyes of others. In family life, many parents become so accustomed to sacrifice that they forget themselves entirely. They give all their time, energy, and emotions, yet never pause to ask whether their own mind is still at peace. This exhaustion accumulates over the years and eventually appears as irritability, control, or a quiet resentment they themselves cannot explain. When a mother or father does not know how to return and care for themselves, they unintentionally pass that tension on to their children, even while believing they are doing their very best. The same pattern appears in work life. Many people take pride in their ability to endure pressure, to work endlessly, to always meet the demands of others. But deep inside, they are being drained. Without space to breathe, they become tense, withdrawn, or emotionally distant. They may complete their tasks, but they lose their presence and their joy of living. Buddhism does not praise blind sacrifice. It emphasizes awareness in every action, knowing when to continue and when to stop. In relationships, not putting yourself first often leads to imbalance. When you repeatedly ignore your own needs to keep the peace, you slowly lose touch with your inner voice. That silence does not disappear. It turns into distance, into unspoken pain, and sometimes erupts into conflict. Putting yourself first here does not mean demanding that others change. It means being honest with yourself about what you are feeling. Mindfulness begins with returning to a body that is tense, returning to a mind that is tired, returning to emotions that have been suppressed. When you allow yourself to see all of this without judgment, you are laying the foundation for healing. You do not need to become better or more perfect. You only need to stop abandoning yourself. When you put yourself first in mindfulness, you do not become more harmful to others. You become gentler, clearer, and more sincere. From there, what you give no longer comes from fear or obligation, but from inner fullness. And that is exactly what the Buddha pointed toward. Mindfulness begins with not abandoning yourself. Lesson 2. Letting go of blind endurance and understanding true patience. After beginning to return to yourself through mindfulness, many people face a difficult question. If I stop enduring, will I become weak or selfish? For many years, we have been taught that strength means knowing how to endure, that maturity means gritting your teeth and bearing it, and that letting go is a sign of failure. But in the light of Buddhist teachings, endurance is not always the right path. In the original script, there is a very powerful idea. Endurance without boundaries is self-destruction. When you continue to endure what harms you without awareness, you slowly erode both body and mind. Buddhism does not encourage blind endurance. Buddhism speaks of patience, known as Khanti, but Khanti is not about clenching your teeth and accepting everything. Khanti in Buddhism is a quality of wisdom. It is not silence born of fear, nor endurance born of habit. Khanti is the ability to see clearly what is happening, to understand its nature, and from that clarity to choose letting go or stopping without generating resentment. When you clearly see that a situation is causing you harm, patience does not tell you that you must remain in that suffering. Many people confuse wise patience with patience rooted in fear. Wise patience arises from understanding. You know what is happening, you know your limits, and you choose a response that does not further harm yourself or others. Patience rooted in fear, on the other hand, comes from fear of abandonment, fear of judgment, or fear of losing acceptance. That kind of patience causes the mind to contract, grow heavy, and fill with silent bitterness. In family life, there are people who accept being treated without respect for many years simply because they fear breaking a relationship. They convince themselves that this is patience, that this is sacrifice. But deep inside, their minds are full of pain and resentment. That endurance does not make the relationship healthier. It only allows suffering to quietly spread. Kanti does not ask you to continue tolerating injustice. Kanti invites you to face the truth with a clear and steady mind. The same is true in work life. Some people remain in toxic environments, prolonged pressure, and constant disrespect because they fear losing stability. They believe they are training their capacity to endure, but their bodies grow exhausted, their minds remain tense, and their joy in living slowly disappears. Buddhism does not praise endurance that damages body and mind. Buddhism teaches that wisdom must walk together with compassion, and that compassion includes yourself. The Buddha taught not to commit unwholesome actions and to keep the mind pure. Unwholesome actions are not only those that harm others. They also include continuing to harm yourself without awareness. When you remain in a situation that steadily disturbs your mind, you are moving against the path of purification that the Buddha pointed to. Letting go is not running away. Letting go is the result of seeing clearly. When you see that a form of endurance no longer brings transformation, no longer nurtures understanding or compassion, stopping becomes an act of wisdom. Kanti allows you to endure necessary difficulties on the path of practice, but it also allows you to step away from unnecessary suffering. When you learn to distinguish between wise patience and patience born of fear, you begin to release many old burdens. You no longer need to prove strength through pain. You no longer measure your worth by how much you can endure. You begin to listen more deeply to your body and your mind, and from there make choices that are gentle yet steady. Letting go of blind endurance is an important step on the path of healing. It does not make you weaker, it makes you more awake. When you stop destroying yourself through ignorant patience, you open space for true stability and balance. From that foundation, the next stage of practice gradually becomes clear, leading you toward a deeper discipline, the discipline of letting go with understanding and of compassion that begins with yourself. Lesson 3. Discipline in Buddhism is knowing how to let go, not forcing yourself. After understanding that putting yourself first is mindfulness and that patience does not mean blind endurance, we naturally arrive at another question. What is true discipline? In modern life, discipline is often understood as forcing yourself to do more, endure more, and push through emotions with sheer willpower. But in Buddhism, discipline does not follow the path of coercion. Discipline is the clarity to know what should be kept and what must be released. In the original script, there's a very important idea. Discipline is not measured by what we endure, but by what we dare to refuse. When this idea is translated into the spirit of Buddhism, it becomes very clear through the path of morality, concentration, and wisdom. Moral discipline is not a set of rules meant to punish. It is protection. Concentration is not forcing the mind to be still. It is the natural result of a mind that is no longer being pulled in every direction. Wisdom is not information. Wisdom is clear seeing that allows letting go at the right time. Discipline in Buddhism begins with moral discipline. Moral discipline helps us recognize which actions, words, and habits are draining our life energy. When a habit causes the mind to become increasingly restless and the body increasingly exhausted, continuing to maintain it is not discipline, but self-harm. Letting go here is not weakness. Letting go is an act of wisdom when we clearly see the consequences of clinging. Many people think that letting go means abandoning responsibility. But in Buddhism, letting go means releasing what no longer nourishes inner stability. There are habits that appear harmless on the surface but quietly leak energy every single day. Prolonged conversations filled with negativity, repetitive thoughts about past mistakes, familiar reactions of anger or comparison. Without mindfulness, we think we are simply living normally. In reality, the mind is filled with clutter that we do not recognize. The image of clearing trash from the mind is very close to the spirit of practice. If a room is full of garbage, you cannot sit and breathe easily. The mind is the same. Every time you hold on to a thought that hurts you, a relationship that keeps you anxious, or a habit that exhausts body and mind, you are adding more trash to your inner space. Discipline in Buddhism is the regular act of cleaning, not rushed, but honest. Letting go of relationships that disturb the mind is one of the greatest challenges. Because we fear loss, we fear loneliness, we fear being misunderstood. But if a relationship constantly forces you to tense up, suppress your emotions, or repeatedly doubt your own worth, staying is not compassion, it is self-neglect. Buddhism does not teach cutting off through anger. Buddhism teaches recognizing and releasing through understanding. When moral discipline is firmly established, concentration begins to appear. Concentration is not a forced state. It is a natural settling when the mind is no longer pulled by unnecessary things. When you remove some of the clutter, Inner space naturally becomes wider. The breath becomes deeper. Presence becomes clearer. You do not need to force yourself to be calm. The mind settles on its own when it is no longer overloaded. From concentration, wisdom gradually arises. Wisdom is the ability to see what is happening without being swept away by it. With wisdom, you know when to continue and when to stop. You know which effort is necessary and which effort is driven by fear. Wisdom allows discipline to become a path of liberation rather than a burden. This kind of discipline is very different from forcing yourself. Forcing yourself creates tension. Letting go creates lightness. Forcing yourself often comes from the desire to become someone else. Letting go comes from accepting who you are right now. When you release what is unnecessary, you do not lose strength. You return to yourself the energy that has been leaking away. At the end of this lesson, try a very gentle meditation. Sit quietly for a few minutes. Softly bring your attention to the breath. Do not control it. Just observe. Then, in silence, ask yourself, what in my life is making my mind uneasy? What am I holding on to only because I'm afraid to let go? There is no need to answer immediately. Simply acknowledge. Each time you recognize a piece of clutter in the mind, you have already begun practicing discipline in the Buddhist sense. And from that letting go, the next part of the path will naturally unfold. Lesson 4. Boundaries are not walls, but precepts that protect the mind. There is a very common misunderstanding that when we set boundaries, we are building walls that separate us from the world. Many people are afraid to say no because they believe it means being cold, unloving, or damaging relationships. But in the light of Buddhist teachings, boundaries are not a rejection of people. They are a way of protecting the mind from sinking deeper into suffering. Right boundaries do not make the mind smaller. They allow the mind to become freer. In modern life, the idea of boundaries is often discussed as a psychological skill. Yet in Buddhism, this spirit has been present from the very beginning through moral precepts. Precepts are not rigid rules meant to control human beings. They are principles of living that help the mind avoid being swept away by greed, anger, and delusion. When the mind is no longer pulled by unwholesome impulses, it naturally becomes lighter, clearer, and more at ease. Keeping precepts is not about tying yourself up. On the contrary, precepts help you recognize where the safe limits are so you do not continue harming yourself or others. Without boundaries, we easily give in to momentary emotions, speak words that wound, and remain in situations that disturb the mind. Precepts appear like a soft fence, not to imprison the mind, but to prevent it from falling again and again into familiar pits of suffering. The Buddha taught that keeping precepts is keeping the mind free. This freedom does not come from doing whatever we want. It comes from no longer being dragged around by unmindful reactions. When you clearly know what damages your mind and you are awake enough to stop, that is the moment a boundary is established through wisdom rather than fear. In relationships, saying no without anger is a very deep practice. When you refuse something with awareness, without resentment or self-defense, you are keeping precepts with yourself. You do not need to raise your voice. You do not need to explain excessively. You do not need to feel guilty. You only need to be honest about what you feel and express it with a calm mind. This is not closing a door. It is clarity. Many people are used to saying yes while feeling exhausted inside. They fear making others unhappy. They fear losing connection. But connection built on continuous self-sacrifice is not a healthy connection. When you repeatedly cross your own limits, tension accumulates in the mind and gradually turns into anger. Boundaries are not what break relationships. The absence of boundaries is what makes relationships fragile. In work life, setting boundaries is also a form of keeping precepts. When you know how to stop before demands exceed your capacity, you are protecting your life energy. When you do not carry work home in your mind, you are giving the mind space to rest. This does not make you less responsible. It helps you work with fuller presence. Boundaries also need to be set with yourself. There are repetitive thoughts that disturb the mind. There are habits that exhaust the body, yet continue because they feel familiar. Keeping precepts with yourself means recognizing these patterns and gently stopping. No blaming, no forcing, just enough awareness to not keep walking the old path. When boundaries are established through mindfulness, the mind begins to feel safe. You no longer need to stay constantly alert or defensive. You know you have the right to stop. You know you do not have to carry everything. From that sense of safety, compassion can naturally arise without being mixed with exhaustion or self-sacrifice. Such boundaries do not distance you from the world. They allow you to be fully present in each relationship. When you clearly know where you are and how far you can go, you are no longer pulled around by other people's emotions. You listen without losing yourself. You give without being depleted. Keeping precepts is not living in isolation. Keeping precepts is living with awareness. When the mind is protected from impulses that create suffering, you begin to feel a very gentle freedom. Not the freedom to do whatever you want, but the freedom of no longer being dragged by old habits. From this foundation, the path of practice continues to open, guiding the mind toward deeper stability, where life energy is preserved and nourished in a sustainable way. Lesson 5. Energy is karma. And what karma are you creating each day? In Buddhist teachings, nothing appears by chance. Every experience you are living has a cause, and that cause begins very quietly from small movements within the mind. When we speak about energy, we often think of feeling tired or strong. But in Buddhism, energy goes much deeper. Energy is the activity of karma being created moment by moment through thoughts, speech, and actions. In the original script, there is a powerful observation that energy is the currency you use every day. Where you spend it, your life gradually moves in that direction. When this idea is expressed in Buddhist language, it becomes clear that energy is karma in motion. Each time a thought arises in your mind, no matter how small, you are planting a seed in the stream of your consciousness. The Buddha taught that mind leads all phenomena. Mind is the root, the place where everything begins. When the mind is filled with restlessness, the energy you emit carries restlessness. When the mind holds anger, the energy you generate carries harm. And when the mind is nurtured with mindfulness and compassion, the energy you create gradually leads you toward stability and peace. Nothing that happens outside begins anywhere other than inside. Many people do not realize how unconsciously they spend their energy every day. We let the mind run through repetitive thoughts. We allow emotions to pull us into familiar reactions. We engage in conversations that make the mind heavier. We stay in environments that drain us without ever stopping to observe. Each time this happens, we are creating karma without knowing it. Karma is not a sentence. Karma is a process. When you continuously nourish a certain type of energy, your life gradually takes the shape of that energy. If each day you wake up with hurry, anxiety, and resistance, your mind becomes accustomed to tension. If each day you allow yourself to pause, breathe deeply, and recognize your emotions, your mind slowly learns how to rest. In Buddhism, karmic action is not created only through major deeds. It is formed through very small thoughts. A quiet blaming thought, a silent comparison, a prolonged worry. Each one is a seed, and whichever seed is watered most often will grow stronger. When you understand this, you begin to take responsibility for your energy. There are days when you feel exhausted, not because you did too much, but because your mind has spent energy in ways that do not nourish you. You may sit still all day and yet feel drained. You may speak very little, but inside feel full of conflict. This shows that energy does not lie in external activity, but in the inner current of the mind. When you start observing your energy, you realize that not everyone and not everything deserves your full attention. Some thoughts do not need to be followed. Some reactions do not need to be fed. Some emotions only need to be recognized and allowed to pass. This is not indifference. This is mindfulness. Reflecting on energy during the day is a very gentle yet deep practice. At the end of the day, sit quietly for a few minutes. Softly look back. Where did my energy go today? Which moments made the mind lighter? Which moments made the mind heavier? There is no need to judge, just acknowledge. Each time you recognize a current of energy, you have already begun transforming karma. When you know that energy is karma, you no longer live unconsciously. You understand that every thought has a direction. Every choice leaves a trace. And you have the ability to choose to plant seeds that nourish peace and stability. There is no need to be perfect. You only need enough awareness to return. From this reflection, the next part of the path gradually reveals itself, where you learn how to end old cycles and open a new direction for your mind. Lesson 6. Do not negotiate with ignorance and end the cycle of suffering. There are limits in life that do not come from external circumstances, but are formed through quiet compromises within the mind. We often believe we are trapped because of situations, because of other people, because of fate. But in the light of Buddhist teachings, most of these limits arise from ignorance. Ignorance does not mean knowing nothing. It means not seeing clearly what is happening within ourselves. And when we do not see clearly, we begin to negotiate with suffering. In the original script, there is a very profound idea that limits are not walls, but negotiations we create with ourselves. When this idea is expressed in Buddhist language, it becomes clear through the chain of dependent origination taught by the Buddha. From ignorance comes action. When ignorance is present, karmic activity continues, and the cycle of suffering repeats itself. Each time we tell ourselves to endure just a little longer, that things will somehow work themselves out, we are continuing to negotiate with ignorance. Ignorance does not always appear in obvious forms. It often wears the familiar clothing of habit. We are used to reacting in old ways. We are used to thinking in old patterns. We are used to living within forms of suffering that have become familiar. And because they are familiar, we assume they are normal. We do not realize that this very familiarity is what keeps us trapped in the cycle. There are forms of suffering that have existed in our lives for a long time. We are accustomed to worrying. We are accustomed to blaming ourselves. We are accustomed to putting the needs of others first. We are accustomed to postponing change because we fear instability. Each of these habits is a subtle form of ignorance. They lead us to keep walking the same path even when we already know it does not lead to peace. The Buddha taught that because of ignorance, action arises. When we do not see the nature of suffering clearly, we continue to create actions that lead to suffering. We react instead of responding. We avoid instead of facing. We try to fix the outside without returning to look within. Each time we do this, the cycle is reinforced. Negotiating with ignorance often comes with very familiar inner phrases. I am not ready yet. I need more time. The circumstances are not right. When things are better, I will change. These statements sound reasonable, but when repeated for too long, they become excuses that allow suffering to continue. Ignorance does not need a big reason. It only needs a small delay that lasts a long time. In Buddhism, awakening is not about reaching a special state. Awakening is the moment you stop negotiating. When you clearly see that a habit is causing you suffering and you no longer justify it, awakening has begun. When you recognize that a way of living is draining your energy and you stop even though fear is still present, awakening is here. Ending the cycle of suffering does not require changing your entire life in a single day. It begins with not continuing to compromise with what you already see clearly. When the mind knows but still looks away, ignorance is being fed. When the mind sees but continues anyway, suffering is being maintained. But when the mind sees and stops, even with one small step, the stream of karma begins to change direction. There are very simple moments that carry great significance. You notice yourself about to speak a familiar word that causes harm. You stop. You notice yourself thinking in an old way that unsettles the mind. You do not follow it. You realize you are in a situation that no longer feels right. You begin to question it. These moments are precisely when you are no longer negotiating with ignorance. Ignorance does not disappear immediately. But each time you do not cooperate with it, its power weakens. When you stop negotiating with suffering, suffering loses its place to cling. You do not need to fight it. You only need to stop feeding it. That stopping itself is the arising of wisdom. Awakening, therefore, is not something distant. It is present in very concrete daily choices. When you stop enduring unconsciously, when you stop repeating old reactions, when you stop deceiving yourself into believing that suffering is unavoidable. Each time you do this, you end a small cycle. When you no longer negotiate with ignorance, the mind begins to have space. In that space, you can breathe more deeply. You can listen more clearly. You can see where you are without hiding. From there, the path of practice becomes clearer. Not because everything is perfect, but because you have chosen to stop walking in the darkness of old compromises. Lesson 7. Silence is where the Buddha always returns. When we no longer continue to negotiate with ignorance, the mind naturally begins to seek another kind of space. Not the noisy space of constant thinking, and not the tense space of effort and striving, but silence. In Buddhism, silence is not an escape from the world. Silence is the path of returning in order to see clearly what is truly happening. And meditation, at its core, is the practice of that silence. Many people are afraid of silence because in silence, everything that has been hidden gradually appears. Suppressed emotions, unresolved thoughts, pains that have never been named. But the Buddha did not see silence as something to avoid. On the contrary, silence is where he always returned in order to listen fully to both body and mind. When the noise of reaction fades, wisdom has the chance to arise. Silence in the spirit of Buddhism is not simply the absence of sound. Silence is a state in which the mind is no longer pulled away by restless thoughts. When you sit still and allow the breath to flow in and out naturally, you are not trying to empty the mind. You are simply allowing everything to settle. In that settling, the body begins to speak first. Tension in the shoulders, shallow breathing, accumulated fatigue. Silence gives you the opportunity to hear what your body has been saying. Listening to the body is the first step of healing. When you allow the body to be felt without judgment, it no longer needs to tense itself in order to send stronger signals. Many pains do not need explanations. They only need to be listened to. In silence, you realize that the body has endured a great deal on behalf of the mind. And when the mind begins to soften, the body gradually releases as well. After listening to the body, silence leads you to listening to the mind. Not to analyze or fix, but to recognize. Familiar thoughts begin to appear, repeating worries, old memories. Silence does not chase them away. Silence simply illuminates. When you look at a thought without following it, the thought gradually loses its power. When you recognize an emotion without reacting, the emotion naturally transforms. The Buddha taught that in stillness, wisdom arises. Wisdom does not come from thinking more. Wisdom comes from the ability to see clearly when the mind is no longer disturbed. As everything slows down, you begin to see the connection between thoughts and emotions. You see how a small idea can lead to a large reaction. And in that clear seeing, you have the freedom to not be carried away. Images of nature are often used to describe silence in Buddhism. A quiet forest, light filtering through the leaves, a gentle breeze moving the branches. Nothing is rushed, nothing needs to be achieved. In that space, the breath becomes a natural rhythm. When you breathe in, you know you are breathing in. When you breathe out, you know you are breathing out. That is all. Yet this knowing is the foundation of mindfulness. Silence does not require special conditions. You do not need to be in a distant place. Silence can begin in the very moment you pause in the middle of a busy day. One deep breath, one inward glance, 1 minute of not speaking. When you create space for silence, you create the conditions for the mind to rest. And when the mind rests, energy begins to restore. Many people believe meditation means achieving a peaceful feeling. But in reality, meditation is learning how to stay with whatever is present. Sometimes that is calm. Sometimes that is unrest. Silence does not select. Silence receives. That very receiving allows the mind to stop fighting experience. And when there is no more fighting, suffering gradually lessens. Silence also teaches patience. Not patience in order to endure, but patience in order to see things arise and pass away. A thought comes and goes. An emotion arises and settles. When you do not rush to intervene, you learn a deep lesson about impermanence. No state lasts forever. Even restlessness is not permanent if you do not continue to feed it. When silence becomes a place you can return to, you are no longer afraid of the empty spaces in life. You do not need to fill every moment with activity or sound. You begin to trust that simply being present is enough. The trust makes the mind steadier amid change. Silence does not separate you from life. Silence helps you enter life with greater clarity. When you have listened to the body and listened to the mind in quiet, you return to the world with a different presence. Lighter, slower, and from that foundation, you begin to see more clearly the elements around you that influence your mind, the people, the environments, the conditions that support or disturb your inner balance. And this is the natural transition that leads you toward choosing the right environment for the next step on the path of awakening. Lesson 8. Environment is condition, and choosing conditions is choosing your life. When the mind has learned to return to silence in order to listen to body and mind, another realization gradually becomes clear. Not all unrest is born from within. Much disturbance is nurtured by the environment we live in every single day. In Buddhism, environment is not only physical space. It is the entire web of conditions surrounding us and continuously influencing our consciousness in quiet and subtle ways. The Buddha taught about cause, condition, and result as an unbroken flow. No outcome appears on its own. Every state of mind, every way of living, every experience of suffering or peace is the result of causes and conditions coming together. Environment is one of the strongest conditions. When a seed is planted in suitable soil, it sprouts very quickly. The mind is the same. When the mind is placed in an environment that nourishes awareness, stability has the conditions to grow. When the mind remains in a chaotic environment, suffering easily multiplies. Many people try to practice while still placing themselves among things that disturb the mind every day. They hope for inner peace, yet they continuously expose themselves to negative speech, tense relationships, and spaces filled with pressure. This is like trying to keep a small lamp lit in a strong wind, not because the lamp is weak, but because the conditions are not supportive. You cannot expect the mind to remain awake if each day you allow it to be pulled by disturbance. In the original script, environment is mentioned as a factor that determines the direction of one's life. When this idea is viewed through Buddhism, it becomes clear that choosing environment is choosing conditions, and choosing conditions is choosing the path you will walk. No one lives apart from surrounding influences. Even a person with strong willpower will gradually change if they remain too long in an environment that does not nourish them. The Buddha once said that being near the wise is like entering a garden of flowers. Even without picking a flower, the fragrance clings to your clothes. An environment of mindfulness works the same way. When you are near people who live slowly, who know how to listen, who know how to protect their mind, you do not need to try very hard. Stability spreads naturally. On the other hand, when you stay in environments filled with comparison, competition, and anxiety, the mind is easily affected without realizing it. Environment is not only people. It also includes the information you consume, the images you see, and the stories you listen to each day. Each time you come into contact with a certain kind of energy, you allow that condition to enter your mind. If you constantly feed the mind with worry and fear, the mind becomes accustomed to that state. If you allow yourself to touch quietness, understanding, and compassion, the mind gradually learns how to rest. Choosing environment does not mean escaping life. Choosing environment is an act of responsibility toward your own mind. When you recognize that a space or a relationship constantly keeps your mind tense, creating distance is not selfish. It is understanding conditions. Buddhism does not teach cutting off through anger. Buddhism teaches adjusting conditions through mindfulness. There are periods in life when you need quiet in order to recover. There are times when you need to be near people who support your awareness. And there are moments when you need to step away from environments that have completed their role. Everything is impermanent. An environment that suits you today may no longer suit you tomorrow. Wisdom lies in knowing when to stay and when to leave. When you begin to change your environment, you will notice transformation happening very gently. No forcing. No struggle. The mind naturally becomes less agitated. Old reactions gradually lose their strength. You have more space to breathe, to feel, to practice. This does not make life poorer. It makes life more refined. Environment is condition, but conditions can be chosen. You cannot control everything that happens, but you can choose what is allowed to stay close to your mind. Each time you choose an environment that nourishes you, you are planting a new cause for the future. That cause will gradually bear fruit, not in a single day, but through quiet accumulation. When you deeply understand cause, condition, and result, you stop blaming yourself or others so much. You begin to see life as a flowing stream. Everything that comes and goes has its causes. And you can participate in that flow more mindfully by choosing wholesome conditions for yourself. When the environment around you becomes more harmonious with the path you are walking, the mind has the conditions to stabilize. That stability is not the final goal, it is the foundation. From that foundation, you begin to return to caring for body and mind more deeply, recognizing that this very body is also a powerful condition that needs to be nourished with understanding and respect. And from there, the journey continues to unfold in a very natural way. Lesson 9. The body is the boat and the mind is the one who steers. When the surrounding environment has been adjusted so it becomes less chaotic, another truth gradually becomes very clear. No path of practice can go far without the support of the body. In Buddhism, body and mind are not separate. They function as one unified whole. The body is the boat, and the mind is the one who steers. If the boat is damaged, no matter how alert the one steering may be, it is difficult to cross rough waters. And if the one steering is unsettled, even a strong boat can easily drift off course. Many people seek stability by working only with the mind, forgetting that the body is where the mind actually lives. When the body is exhausted, tense, and neglected, the mind finds it very hard to remain clear. The Buddha reminded us that this body is the support for practice, not something to cling to, but something to understand. Without a body that is cared for properly, practice becomes fragile. In daily life, many signals from the body are ignored. Small aches, shallow breathing, evenings of deep exhaustion. We grow accustomed to overlooking the body as we chase work, responsibilities, and expectations. But the body does not forget. What is ignored accumulates and eventually appears as fatigue, illness, or a sense of emptiness without a clear cause. When the body is not listened to, the mind gradually becomes restless as well. Walking meditation is one of the simplest yet deepest practices for reconnecting body and mind. When you take each step slowly, aware that you are stepping, body and mind begin to move together. Each step becomes a support. You do not need to go anywhere. You only need to be present. With each step, you feel the weight of the body, the rhythm of the breath, and the contact with the ground. That contact brings the mind back to the present moment. The breath is the most natural bridge between body and mind. You do not need to change the breath. You only need to know that you are breathing. When the breath comes in, you know it is coming in. When the breath goes out, you know it is going out. The body breathes the mind knows. When the mind knows, the body gradually releases. The breath becomes deeper. The heartbeat slows. A sense of inner safety begins to form. Caring for the body is not indulgence. Caring for the body is respecting the boat that carries you through life. When you sleep enough, eat with awareness, and move in moderation, you create conditions for the mind to stabilize. Buddhism does not see the body as something to ignore or punish. It sees the body as a precious means for practicing mindfulness. Some people think that practice means enduring physical hardship, but the Buddha did not teach self-mortification. He taught the middle way. When the body is pushed too far, the mind resists. When the body is cared for appropriately, the mind has the conditions to rest. The middle way is not found in extremes, but in continuous listening and adjustment. As body and mind begin to work together, you start to notice many subtle things. Tension in the body often comes with a familiar thought. A heavy feeling in the chest may be linked to an unrecognized worry. When you return to sensing the body, you are not only caring for the physical form, you are opening a door to understanding the mind more deeply. In meditation, the body becomes an important object of contemplation. Sensations of warmth and coolness, expansion and contraction, movement. When you observe the body with mindfulness, you learn the teaching of impermanence directly. No sensation stays still. No state lasts forever. This clear seeing helps the mind cling less and fear less. The body is the boat, but the boat does not move on its own. The mind is the one who steers, but the one who steers must be awake. When the mind is pulled into thoughts of the past or worries about the future, the boat easily becomes unstable. When the mind rests in the body and the breath, the boat moves more steadily. You do not need to arrive anywhere. Stability is found right in the present moment. There are days when you cannot meditate for long, but you can still care for the body through very small actions. A slow meal, a mindful step, a deep breath before reacting. These small actions accumulate and create great change. Practice is not something distant. It happens in the way you treat your body each day. When you begin to see the body as a companion rather than a tool to be endured, the relationship between body and mind changes. You no longer push yourself beyond your limits. You know when to stop. You know when to rest. And from that respect, the mind gives rise to compassion toward yourself. This body as the support for practice is not just a phrase. It is a constant reminder. Whenever you feel lost, return to the body. Feel your feet. Feel the breath. Feel the life that is truly unfolding in this very moment. When body and mind are both present, you are no longer pulled too far away. From that harmony, a very quiet strength begins to form. You do not need to try harder. You only need to be more fully present. And when body and mind walk together on the same path, the boat of life gradually enters calmer waters, opening space to look more deeply into the past, to understand, to let go, and to continue the journey of healing in a more complete and wholehearted way. Lesson 10. The past does not need to be healed. It only needs to be understood and released. When body and mind have begun to move together in steady presence, a deeper question naturally arises. What is truly holding us back? Many people believe it is the past. Painful memories, old mistakes, things that happened and cannot be changed. We believe we must heal the past, repair what was broken, soften the pain of memory. But in the light of Buddhist teachings, the past does not need to be healed. The past only needs to be understood correctly and released through right view. Right view is seeing things as they truly are. Seeing clearly is not justifying or denying. Seeing clearly is viewing the past as a chain of causes and conditions that has already been completed. What has happened is no longer happening. What causes suffering is not the past itself, but the way we keep carrying it into the present through thoughts, emotions, and endless self-blame. Without right view, we turn memory into a verdict and ourselves into someone forever on trial. The Buddha taught that the past has already passed. The future has not yet arrived, and only the present moment is where life is truly unfolding. This teaching does not ask us to forget the past. It invites us to look at the past from the ground of the present. When we stand in the present with an awake mind, we can look back at what happened without being pulled into old emotions. At that point, the past becomes a lesson rather than a wound. Many people spend years trying to heal memories. They analyze them, they retell them, they repeat the old story again and again, hoping that one day it will stop hurting. But the more it is repeated, the more the memory is watered. In Buddhism, understanding and releasing do not come from digging deeper, but from seeing the nature of memory clearly. Memory is only an image in the mind. It arises and passes if it is not continually fed. Right view helps us see that at that time, we acted with the level of understanding and capacity we had. No more, no less. Without sufficient awareness, we acted in ignorance. But ignorance is not a sin. Ignorance is the common condition of not yet seeing clearly. When this is understood, self-blame begins to dissolve. Not because we excuse mistakes, but because we understand causes and conditions correctly. The past does not need to be fixed. It has already completed itself. What needs transformation is how we relate to it in the present. Each time we recall an old event and let the mind sink into regret or resentment, we pull the past into the present. But each time we remember and simply acknowledge that it happened, then return to the breath, we cut the continuation of suffering. Letting go is not pushing away. Letting go is no longer holding on. When you stop gripping the old story to define who you are, the past gradually loses its power. It does not disappear, but it no longer controls your emotions and choices. Letting go is a very gentle act. It happens when you stop arguing with memory. In Buddhist practice, returning to the present is the key to letting go. When the mind wanders to the past, gently bring it back to the body. Feel the breath. Feel the contact of your feet with the ground. The present does not erase the past, but it gives you a place to stand so you are not pulled backward. Understanding the past through right view also helps us not fear the future. When we see that everything operates through causes and conditions, we no longer label ourselves as permanent failures or forever damaged. We understand that each moment is an opportunity to plant new seeds. There is no need to wait until the past no longer hurts to begin living. Life is happening right now. Some memories still carry sensation. That does not mean you have not let go. It only means the mind needs time to become familiar with a new way of seeing. Each time you do not chase memory, you let go a little more. Each time you return to the present, you strengthen right view. The past does not need healing because it is no longer alive. What is alive is how you are present now. When you understand this, the energy spent resisting memory is released. The mind becomes lighter, not because everything is resolved, but because you are no longer carrying unnecessary weight. Returning to the present is not avoiding responsibility. It is the foundation for living more responsibly. When you are here and now, you see your choices clearly. You are no longer ruled by old reactions. You begin to live with greater awareness. When the past is placed in its proper position, the present opens. And in that present, you can move forward without being pulled backward. Not to forget, but to understand. Not to deny, but to release. From that release, the path ahead becomes clearer, not because memory is gone, but because memory is no longer standing in front of you. As we arrive at the final moments of this journey, there is nothing new that needs to be added. There is only something to be gathered back in. All the teachings, the reflections, the quiet pauses along the way have been pointing toward one very simple truth. Put yourself first does not mean placing the ego above others. Put yourself first means returning to yourself as your own refuge with mindfulness before stepping back into the world. The year 2026 is not mentioned here as a milestone to do more, achieve more, or prove anything. It is offered as a very gentle reminder. This may be the year you allow yourself to live more awake, more enough, and more at ease. Not because every problem has disappeared, but because you no longer turn away from yourself when suffering arises. Throughout this journey, you have seen that returning is not retreating. Returning is how you stand firmly. When you know how to rely on yourself, you no longer desperately seek reassurance from the outside. You no longer endure unconsciously. You no longer negotiate with ignorance. You learn to listen to the body, to see the mind clearly, to choose wholesome conditions, to release what is no longer needed. None of this takes you farther away from life. It allows you to live within life with fuller presence. There is a very gentle truth that Buddhist teachings continuously remind us of. When you put yourself first with mindfulness, you do not abandon anyone. You simply stop abandoning yourself. You do not become cold. You become clear. You do not love less. You love without harming yourself. And from that steadiness, giving becomes purer, no longer mixed with exhaustion or hidden resentment. If there is one thing to carry with you after this video, let it be a very small reminder. Each time you notice yourself drifting away from yourself, pause. Take one breath. Remember that you have the right to return. There is no need to be perfect. No need to wait until everything is resolved. You only need enough awareness to stop abandoning yourself again. If these words touched a quiet place within you, you may leave one sentence in the comments. In 2026, I choose to return to myself. No explanation needed. No long story required. Just a gentle affirmation for yourself. And if you wish to continue with these healing Buddhist reflections, these moments of returning, these teachings that help you live more slowly and more deeply amid a changing world, you may stay with the channel. A like or subscription is not to support anyone else, but to remind yourself that you have chosen this path of awareness. The journey does not end here. It simply settles. And from that settling, each day of living can become a mindful step, where you remember that what matters most is not how far you go, but whether you are still staying with yourself.